was going to say good morning, but I think it's literally just turned 12:01, so I'll just say howdy. Welcome to No Rainbow Capitalism. What will it take to win LGBTIQ plus liberation? My name is Ree. I'll be chairing this session. I'm a fairly new member of Socialist Alliance. I am that blue-haired leftist, obviously. And I'm very privileged to share this stage today with some incredibly talented and hard-working speakers. Quick housekeeping, I'm assuming everyone's already been here, but bathrooms, snacks, and if you're not already on the Green Left or Socialist Alliance contact list and you would like to, grab one of our members and we'll grab your name and number down. We are holding this conference on Wajak Noongar Budja. The Socialist Alliance stands in solidarity with all Indigenous peoples, especially, of course, those of Australia, in the ongoing fight for freedom from incarceration, land rights, and genuine material sovereignty. Land was never ceded, always was, and always will be Aboriginal land. So the introduction to this session is No Rainbow Capitalism. This is sponsored by Queer Liberation Boorloo, which we will be discussing things like pink capitalism, profiting off or exploiting LGBT people and culture, the struggles that our people face, and how they are enmeshed with other social issues. Introducing the speakers who will be slaying, serving, and speaking on this stage today. We have Rachel Evans from Gadi, Sydney. Rachel is an organiser for Socialist Alliance and a long-term LGBTIQA rights campaigner. Mayoral member for City of Sydney, National Housing Justice Campaign coordinator, and City of Sydney for Palestine activist. And they will be discussing queer solidarity with Palestine, queer rights in New South Wales, and religious freedom. We then have Jasmine Noel, who is an activist with Queer Liberation Boorloo, who will be speaking on queer youth and referring to background in social work. Then we have Nova Sobieralski, so from Boorloo, Perth, from our last two. And Nova has been a member of Socialist Alliance for a long time, who is involved in campaigns for trans rights through Queer Liberation Boorloo, and will be speaking on queerness as a challenge to the nuclear family. After the panel, we will be opening up to discussion, and we'll take a few questions. We'll see how we're going for time. And just a reminder that the session is live streamed, so anything that you're asking a question or making a point for discussion will be filmed and eventually go public on YouTube. Should we? Yeah, I think that's about it. We'll leave it to our wonderful speakers.
Thanks, Ree. I will switch on a little bit of a PowerPoint. Testing 1, 2. Here we go. Awesome, thanks very much, Ree, and thanks everyone for coming along. My contribution is going to touch on the origins and nature of LGBTIQ plus oppression and what we're up against in the 21st century to win sex and gender liberation, where Palestine is under siege. It will include an appraisal of our advances and challenges in so-called Australia, and I'll use sex and gender diverse and queer to describe LGBTIQ plus interchangeably in this talk, to describe everyone within the rainbow community. I also want to acknowledge that I am a visitor to this beautiful country, and actually that queer comrades and friends have been organising some amazing work, and I'm really looking forward to hearing all of that. I want to acknowledge we're on the Wajak Noongar people's land. They are the traditional owners of where Perth City is situated, and it was the British colonialists that marauded this beautiful land and people and imposed rigid sex and gender binaries on the First Nations communities. Our liberation is bound up with First Nations justice and land, and we strive to pay active solidarity to achieve our common goals. I also want to acknowledge that I've forgotten the PowerPoint, but here it is. This is Lydia Thorpe at 2023 Mardi Gras. And I also wanted to acknowledge the courage and resilience of our sister Chelsea Manning, who gave Julian Assange the Iraq War documents, which exposed the US war machine's brutality. That both are free today is testament to the resilience of the anti-war movement. Now, As comrades in the Global Eco-Socialist Network, and as we will hear more today at this Ecosocialism conference, speakers will explain that capitalism is in a deep and unresolvable crisis. The system's private profiteering by the ruling class is precipitating a global ecological collapse, which can only be resolved by a social revolution that places workers and the poor in control. The billionaire class are fleecing workers through inflation, housing prices, and stagnant wages. Profits are at an all-time high. In 2023, the world's 5 richest men nearly doubled their wealth compared to last year, year 2022, with their collective wealth rising from $405 billion US to $869 billion US. And because the rich get richer by exploiting workers and the environment at greater rates, 5 billion people have suffered a fall in income in 2023. So the drive for further profits from the 1% is insatiable. The bosses bay for more sweet deals from the political class to assuage their fall in the inevitable boom and bust cycle, where some are sacrificed on the altar of free market competition. And over the last 9 months, we have seen how far Western imperialism is prepared to go to maintain its political and military dominance, with Israel's genocide on Gaza live-streamed for millions of people to see. And as the emperor is laid bare, the system becomes more unpopular and the ideological bag of tricks from the 1% becomes more brutal. A polarisation process is underway as rulers whip up fear and loathing amongst the dominant worker groups towards queers, migrants and Muslims to distract from the crimes that they are committing. They say the crisis in housing, for example, is caused by migrants and refugees, not governments refusing to build homes for the people. This ratcheting up of the blame game is most acutely playing out in France, where President Emmanuel Macron is slamming the new Popular Front Left Party's program, saying it's totally immigrationist, a phrase used by the fascists, and also saying that some NFP policies were grotesque, like the fact that you'll be able to go just down to the town hall and change your sex. Now, wouldn't that be wonderful? The fascists and the social democrats alike are targeting queers, migrants, Muslims and socialists, trade unionists and so on. This polarisation is also attracting particularly young people to become progressive activists or to take left-wing politics more seriously. So there was a recent awesome report by the Oz government, a poll. 53% of young people between 18 to 24 in Australia want more socialism and less capitalism. So there is a polarisation. It's not just going to the right. It is also coming to us. Okay, so now, the origins and natures of queer oppression. Sex and gender diversity is a natural part of human existence. Queer oppression stems from the institutions that also oppress women: private property, the patriarchal family unit, and the authoritarian state. Colonisation imposed rigid gender binaries onto First Nations communities. Look at how the British repressed the Hijra in South Asia and the sister girls and brother boys in this continent, or the Portuguese and Spanish efforts to eliminate Two-Spirit Indigenous North Americans. Now, capitalism has been forced by strong movements to offer reforms to the rainbow community, but our oppression won't be resolved until we smash and wither away these institutions that keep us in chains. Again, actually, this was a photo by Zebedee Parks at 2023 Mardi Gras. This is the First Nations float. So reactionary governments are on the rise. Trump, Macron, and they are targeting the sex and gender diverse communities in their attempt to convince the masses of the massive people to conduct business as usual. And this business as usual includes the mass slaughter of Palestinians in perhaps what we are seeing in a phase of war capitalism. In the last 9 months, Israel has killed and or injured 150,000 Palestinians. A European capitalist class organised the occupation of Palestinian land using Judaism as a fig leaf and Zionism as its battering ram. They constructed Israel on Palestine's land 78 years ago. Israel has justified its recent genocide through pinkwashing, the argument that Israel is a beacon and safe haven for LGBTIQ plus people and a beacon of Western democracy. It is the first time in human history that LGBTIQ plus rights have been used to justify a genocide. Gay Independent MP of Sydney, Alex Greenwich, made a speech in New South Wales Parliament in mid-November saying Israel would be the only safe place for him as a gay man, for example. In November 2023, the Israel government posted these two photos on their social media. So this was very much a big part of their November push, ideological push, to dent the opposition that was growing worldwide. So yeah, this soldier, and actually if anyone follows him, he does this a lot. He just goes to areas that are bombed and shows the rainbow flag. Israel bars discrimination on the grounds of sexual orientation. They do recognise foreign same-sex marriage and allow same-sex couples to adopt, but they have not granted marriage equality yet. They rank 50 in the Equaldex LGBT Equality Index, which is a global index. But Israel is a religious, militarised, patriarchal state that privileges citizens of the Jewish religion and oppresses everyone else. Their finance minister, far right, Bersal Shmurit, is a self-proclaimed fascist homophobe. Israel uses queerness for the particular communities in the First World, and they meter out homophobic discourse about religious conservatism and adherence to family values and revulsion towards queerness for the religious right internationally and within their local areas, and to Christian Zionists abroad. Palestine is ranked 146th in the Equaldex LGBT Equality Index, with consensual same-sex sexual acts legal in the West Bank, but not in Gaza. All the current laws in Gaza that criminalise queerness are in fact from colonial Britain and are upheld by Zionism. Israel has exported its pinkwashing program to the US, with pro-Israeli groups Stand With Us touring campuses. They promote their Tel Aviv Pride and queer film festivals throughout the First World. Now, of course, Israel oppresses all Palestinians, including queer Palestinians. There is no welcoming pink door in the wall for queer Palestinians to leave Gaza and make a life in Israel. Queer Palestinian groups, comrades should follow these ones, Al-Quaz and Aswat. They've been working at the grassroots level to bring visibility and acceptance of queer life within Palestinian society. Al-Quaz Queer Palestinian statement in November 2023, they put out a very interesting, very good statement from queer Palestinians in occupied territories, and they gathered 532 signatures, and they gathered signatures from organisations, 50 from 50 countries. Now, Queer Muslims for Palestine and Queers for a Liberated Palestine spokesperson from Brooklyn, Rafa Kidavia, says it in, I think, the best way. We are here to say there is no pride in genocide, that we demand an end to pinkwashing and using our trans queer bodies, stories and struggles to fuel Islamophobia and settler colonialism. I think to add to that, no one is free until Palestine is free. Now, I'm going to touch on the last 5 years where COVID lockdowns were introduced and did have a real impact on our ability to organise against the far right and our governments. And the Christian right were mobilised in this period of COVID lockdowns here in so-called Australia, and they are being reorientated towards the trans community. In the US, there are over 400 laws in state legislature that target the trans community. In Australia, while there is no comparison with this dire situation, we have definitely seen a rise in far-right organising. Now, I'm going to take you very quickly through some of the key dates, and then I'll leave it for the next speakers. So the Religious Discrimination Bill is a homophobic piece of legislation. There is all of this legislation across the states, which mean that the religious organisations have the right to organise themselves if they feel that they have been hard done by in a variety of means. It was introduced federally in 2017 by Malcolm Turnbull. In February 2022, it was defeated, and Scott Morrison shelved it after a number of his party members said they were going to cross the floor in relation to a lack of rights accorded to trans youth within the bill. In December 2023, and there was a gay hate inquiry report launch, which did show that police had failed to properly investigate 30 years of hate crimes and murders towards gay men. In March 2023, trans activists were bashed in Belfield in Sydney's West by Christian Lives Matter right-wingers supporting former Mark Latham's speech in a church. People would have remembered that. That was a real down point in that campaign for trans rights. And then in June 2023, Alex Greenwich introduced the Equality Bill for New South Wales. Now, this Equality Bill is actually very good. It's got some not so good elements to it, but it is actually very good. So in June 2023, the LGBTI rights community started to organise around passing this bill, which we knew was going to be difficult. And against this bill, Coalition of Activist Lesbians Australia, and also an international and New South Wales and Australia-based group, transphobic group called GenSpect Australia. Now, we had World Pride in Sydney. Sydney is the gay queer mecca of Australia. We had World Pride, and the Labor Party, New South Wales, who are in opposition, promised to ban gay conversion. So we were waiting for that when they got elected into state control. Instead, what they did before they banned gay conversion is they introduced their own religious discrimination bill. So, and this bill, the religious exemptions included in the New South Wales Anti-Discrimination Act are in fact the broadest in Australia. So that is, the Civil Liberties crew came out and said you didn't need this religious discrimination bill because you've got all these exemptions in our Anti-Discrimination Act. But in March 2024, New South Wales did ban gay conversion therapy, but it took them 12 months from saying they would from the World Pride Conference, and forced conversions is still legal in Tasmania and South Australia, while Queensland only has a ban in healthcare settings. In March 2024, the Federal Australian Law Reform Commission made public a report which called for the federal government not to introduce a federal religious discrimination bill, and also called for all of the states to remove the exemptions that allow religious schools to discriminate against queer staff and students and single mothers and women. In May 2024, the Cumberland Council, which is Sydney, banned Holly Doug's book, A Focus on Same-Sex Parents. And then in June 2024, the CSC, the Committee for the Community Services, released a report pushing MPs, other MPs and political parties to adopt and pass the Equality Bill, which still hasn't been passed. So that's some of the appraisal. The Federal Religious Discrimination Bill is not yet on the cards, but other comrades from this panel will fill us in on that. So we've pushed back against that. How to win rainbow liberation? Well, there is no queer liberation under capitalism. We need to keep organising the rainbow community around issues of our day, win reforms and rights under the system. But because sex and gender oppression is systemic and benefits the ruling class, we need to fight to revolutionise society and socialise the reproduction and care of the next generation away from the atomised family unit and to society as a whole. War capitalism, the phase perhaps we are in now, is not going to deliver this. Only a post-capitalist world will. In this, we need to build both rainbow community fighting organisations able to develop united fronts with various groups while constructing a multi-generational brain trust of revolutionary activists, an organisation, a party of the 99% that makes connections between oppressed groups and workers to unify movements of opposition and build people's power. This is what it is going to take to win rainbow liberation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Rachel, and we will now hear from Jasmine.
Thanks, everyone. It's actually funny that I'm here. I'm actually not part of the Alliance. I'm actually part of SALT. Not officially, but still. Anyway, a little bit of background about me. I've been a youth worker here in Perth since 2013. As of June the 15th, I just crossed over to my 13th year. Unfortunately, I've encountered a lot of trans youth and queer youth in my work. I've mostly worked with homeless youth, and honestly, things have gone better over time. Not great, but better. Unfortunately, we still lack funding in that sector. There are still services that won't take in trans youth, for example, and most of those services who don't are religious. And here in Western Australia, they are legally allowed to discriminate. One of the biggest downsides to my work that I've encountered is unfortunately the high suicide rate. Unfortunately here in Australia, for trans youth, it is now up to 43%. Considering the average for a trans person is hovering around 41. For queer youth, it's twice as high as a straight peer, basically. One of the biggest issues we face, like I said, is funding. That isn't enough, especially here in Perth. Like, yes, over the last couple of years, both the state and the local Perth government have given extra funding to services such as Living Proud and Transphobic WA. But we won't see what they do with our funding for quite a while, unfortunately. Sorry, in my work, I encounter mostly a lot of straight kids, and a lot of my co-workers are hetero, straight. When I tell them about our issues that we face, and a lot of the youth face, they just brush it off. Like, it's not an issue, not a problem. A lot of them just don't understand. Like, last year, I updated my Cert 4 in youth work. A lot of my classmates had no understanding of what our queer youth go through. They had no idea what our suicide rate is, or our self-harm rate, or our mental health rate is. Like, a lot of my classmates didn't realise, like, yes, things have gone better, but it's not perfect. And unfortunately, we can't reach liberation unless we look after the most vulnerable people part of our community. And unfortunately, there are a lot of gaps, especially here in Western Australia. one of the biggest ones happens to be in our healthcare system. Try and get general routine care here in Western Australia for a young person, you're pretty much going to be on a 4 to 5 year wait list. So, good luck with that. Like, there are a number of youth services that do good work, such as the Freedom Centre, for example, and Pickies. But they can't do it all, of course. There's still lack of services, lack of resources. I mean, our laws are behind the rest of the country. We got no idea what the future is going to look like. We've been told that things are coming, but we haven't really been told a lot of information. I have 2 queer kids of my own. My eldest son, 18. My second child is trans. Recently, me and my other half have just taken a 16-year-old trans girl who got thrown out of her home. And she marks the 17th person we have taken in the past 4 years. Unfortunately, a lot of queer youth and trans youth who end up homeless usually end up on the street. At best, they end up couch surfing. Like, even getting into accommodation, again, wait list 2 to 3 years long. And if you unfortunately try to go for a religious service, you may be knocked back. Like, over the past 13 years, I've met a lot of people. I met a lot of strong people that have tried their best to help, that have tried to improve things. Unfortunately, we're still lagging quite a bit behind. Our government is not doing a lot to help. At the moment, with the current funding they implemented, it's a band-aid solution. More radical things need to happen in order for our community to lower our suicide rate, to improve things. But unfortunately, the government doesn't care. They're willing to put a band-aid on it, and that's it. Sorry. But things are looking out for our community. We're hoping for changes with the reforms to hopefully come in August, was it? August. Yeah. It won't fix everything, but it will be a help and may actually give some young people some hope. Unfortunately, a lot of the kids I met do lose that hope. They've got goals and aims for the future. And that is a common occurrence, and I don't blame them. I'm going to end it here. Thank you for listening.
So, thank you so much, Jasmine. That was so enlightening. And now we will hear from Nova. She'll bring it home before we do some questions.
Hello, is this working? Okay. The question we're presented with today is, what will it take to win LGBTQ plus liberation? Through this speech, I'll be using the acronym and queer pretty interchangeably. And just LGBT. I do mean it inclusively throughout this. I just find it a little clunky. My colleagues have addressed significant parts of the movement for queer liberation. On the one hand, the importance of protecting queer youth, and on the other, international solidarity with Palestine as queer struggle. For my part, as I was writing the speech, I worked out that exploring the full scope of what queer liberation is in its entirety is a bit too much for 10 minutes. So I've limited myself to an analysis of queerness as a challenge to the nuclear family. Marxist analysis of family is well established since the days of, since Engels' The Origins of the Family, Private Property and Estate. Still in its infancy, however, is Marxist analysis of LGBTQ people and our relationship with the wider society. The reasons for this are pretty obvious, with queer history and way of living being largely driven underground for much of history, especially since the advent of capitalism. The historical materialist is left with little to analyse. Of course, LGBT people are not absent from the Marxist canon. In 1895, Edward Bernstein defended his friend Oscar Wilde from the charge of sexual activities which do not fall within the ambit of what passes for normal. In that work, he argues that intimacy between men was natural throughout the animal kingdom, and speculated that the practice came from a lack of mingling with women. It was the 1800s, we've come a long way since then. The modern understanding of queer theory is largely guided by the development of postmodernist theory. This sees the idea of queerness not as expressing a universal pan-historical idea, but instead of as being constructed with multiple factors, including material conditions, institutions, and ideas. This is one of the reasons that historians are so hesitant to call LGBT historical figures LGBT. It's clear that even major figures in modern LGBT history, such as Marsha P. Johnson, had a very different idea of her transgender identity than what is dominant today. The modern idea of queerness starts with the advent of capitalism in the 19th century, and in particular, the antithesis between town and country. In the 1500s, the enclosure movement in Europe forced peasants to take up work in the cities, no longer able to legally rely on the abundance of the commons in the forests and rivers to etch out a survival. It was in these city centres where the atomization of care work into the family unit was manufactured, as the connection to wider community was weakened. Of course, prior to this, LGBT people existed. We are pan-historical, but this changed how we related to each other and to wider society. The cities created the means for people to anonymously explore their gender and sexuality through bathhouses, cruising spots, and drag balls. Queer culture was still suppressed and underground, but it allowed for LGBT communities to form. And with this, people identified with their queer community. This laid the groundwork for a queer politics to emerge. The growth of cities also created new means of employment for queer people, who were, through stigma, excluded from general waged labour. Queer people relied on hustles, theft, and sex work, and organised into communities of care, often taking on the role of mother to others in their community, and meaningfully taking on a greater responsibility to care for others in their community. In being organised towards survival through tight-knit communities rather than biological ties, queer families, though taking on the language of the family, mothers, etc., are radically different from the patriarchal nuclear families. We heard earlier from Jasmine about how this is still practiced by her, taking in no less than 17, did you say? Yeah. 17 young queer people. The nuclear family has also been criticised by Marxist feminists, of course. They observe that the family unit was developed as a means of preserving property relations, keeping property within the ruling class, while privatising care so that they didn't have to pay for bringing up the next generation of workers. Your responsibility to care for your child is in fact legislated, and increasingly, as alienation from our community grows, our responsibility to care for everyone else is neglected. Care work is also not shared equally within a family, with the division between breadwinning and reproductive labour. It's important to point out that there is nothing natural, universal, or unchangeable about this division of labour. I left my book over here. It wouldn't be a Nova speech without a book. Sophie Lewis wrote, "Abolish the Family, a manifesto for care and liberation." Can be a bit ultra-leftist at times, but is mostly good, I'd say. So she points out the inverse relationship between the strength of the nuclear family as an institution and society's responsibility to care communally. Take, for example, the disabled person. If a person with a disability is alone, the state has a responsibility to care for them through financial support. But if they are in a relationship, the responsibility to care for them is privatised onto their partner, onto the individual, and their state support is cut at a great cost to them both. The free love movement in the 1960s focused largely on alternatives to the nuclear family, and in particular, sexual liberation. Not only gay sex, but also forms of non-monogamy were preached and practiced. It's perhaps a retconning of history to say that the free love movement focused largely on sexual liberation alone and had nothing to say about love as care. But in as far as that perception exists, I think it's fair to say that we need a new free love movement today. A free love movement focused on the liberation of care work. The 70s also saw the beginning of the Pride movement, where LGBT people embraced a politics of public visibility kicked off, of course, with the Stonewall Inn riots in 1969. The early Pride movement also spawned the debate between liberationist and assimilationist, with arguments from upper middle class, straight-passing gay people that they should dissociate politically from the more flamboyant and gender non-conforming gay and trans people. Thankfully, this line of argument didn't win out. The wins of the Pride movement are evident today. Queer people, including those who cannot hide their gender identity, are well integrated into the workforce. We won the hard-fought battle for gay marriage. And queer people are safe and more accepted in society than they once were. Although job seekers still advise people not to mention their queer identity when applying for jobs, I wonder why, we are, for the most part, able to find mainstream work. Gender is still enforced through social measures, and attacks on the most marginalised in our community, particularly trans and gender non-conforming people, are on the rise. We have made significant progress, but liberation, we're clearly not there yet. With this growing acceptance, we have seen another change in how queer people survive in society. More queer people from families that aspire towards the nuclear form. More queer people form families that aspire towards the nuclear form. Themselves, their partner, and their child. Tight-knit queer families are still formed, especially among those who faced rejection from their biological families. But it is no longer the primary mode of living for queer people. Alongside this change, we have seen the rise of queer NGOs. But inherent in this model is a divide between the rich and the poor within the LGBT community. Queer issues are increasingly atomized in solidarity and with the intersections of our diverse queer community are neglected. Organisations pop up to serve these intersections, queer Indigenous NGOs and organisations for queer elders, for example. But to run their services, they must compete for funding with the mainstream services. This leads to a sidelining of the most marginalised in our community. The charitable model, I think, has hoodwinked us. It is the primary mode of queer social reproduction today. And through its reliance on competitive and minimal government funding, alongside heaps of unpaid volunteer work, this socially necessary labour is not paid for by the capitalist system, but it is so vital to. So what am I proposing? We cannot have a fully realised idea of queer liberation until that liberation is achieved, but that doesn't mean we can't say anything about it. Ideas of love that go beyond the family are abundant in society, from the Christian concept of agape, from the Greek for universal love, more often preached than practiced, and Indigenous concepts of mob, where your elders are your aunts and uncles, regardless of biological ties, to the free love movement, the chosen queer family. Even in ecological circles, you have this concept of the animism of nature itself, a kinship with the world around you. The privatisation of love and care work in the nuclear family is historically very new, coming about through the social conditions capitalism created. And to liberate care work from privatisation in the nuclear family, that is truly revolutionary. Thank you. Having done the bulk of my speech, can I just talk a little bit about Queer Liberation Boorloo and some of the wins we've had of recent? So, Queer Liberation Boorloo, we kicked off about a year ago. There's about 20 of us in a group chat, some more active than others, as is usual, and we've had an enormous support from everyone in the Boorloo branch of the Socialist Alliance, straight, despite being straight, they've genuinely, they've understood ally to be a verb, right? And they've really lived that ethic. So we set off campaigning. We wanted to have an organisation that wasn't just there to defend against the attacks of the right, but to fight for something affirmative, for advancing queer rights today. And I think we've pretty successfully done that. So the most recent campaigns we've had is to get reforms to the Equal Opportunity Act in Western Australia, which is our version of the discrimination law. Currently, if you are transgender and you haven't got your gender legally changed, you are not protected from discrimination under Western Australian law. And that's wrong. Not to mention all of the usual caveats with exemptions for religious organisations, which don't just affect queer people, but affect women who have children out of wedlock, for example. In religious organisations, they have the right to discriminate against people in those situations. So, unfortunately, the government has gone on to confirm that they're not going to pass the equal opportunity reforms unless they're elected into Parliament again next year. They've given up. But on the other hand, we also fought for reforms to the Gender Recognition Board, to abolish the board, and we won. The government is still taking their sweet time, but we won, because they have drafted the legislation, we've read the legislation. It's not great, but it's a lot better than the board we currently live under in Western Australia. And that will be finally put to Parliament in August? In August. And when that happens, Queer Liberation Boorloo will be out the front, having a rally, and then later on coming in to welcome in the new bill. And we hope that working with various organisations in the more NGO sector, that we can work together to put the pressure on the government to get this bill right, so that it's not such a, it's based on the Northern Territorial model, and we want to improve some of the downfalls of that particular model. Thank you.
Thank you, Nova. That was amazing as always, and we love the book reports. So it is now time for questions. We'll probably be able to take 2 or 3, depending on how long they are. So if anyone would like to indicate if they have a question or a comment that they'd like to share with the panel, please do so now.
No one?
If there is any. 1, 2. Anyone else? 1, 2, 3. All right, cool. I guess we'll just go in that order. If you would like to speak up. Yeah.
Got a microphone.
Yeah, awesome.
Got a
Wanna
mic.
Share
Ooh,
your name.
That's loud. So I'm Angela. Thank you everyone for your presentations. Really, really interesting and insightful. So I'm a community services worker, and Jasmine, I related a lot to what you were saying about people in the sector not understanding the needs of our community. And I'm from Victoria, so we have probably the best laws across the country. But I think amongst the allies or people that are, are okay with our community, if we put it that way, there's a real lack of understanding around our community's needs. And I think since marriage equality, there's a broader sense that everything is okay for people in our community. Like, we've done that bit, so everyone's got their rights and everyone's free. And as we know, that's absolutely not the case. And just down to the assumptions that we face about our identities or our relationships, and just living in a heteronormative society. Something that I'm trying to change at work is the use of inclusive language. So I'd be interested to hear the panel's thoughts on that, because people constantly make assumptions about me and, other people in this room on a daily basis. So I've heard activists talking about breaking the binary language. So I'd be interested to hear what you all think about that. Thank you.
Fantastic, and we'll hear from up the back, or no? Yeah, if you want to stand up, we'll grab your microphone.
Hello. A great deal has been said about reforms and the necessity for reform, and that is, of course, very true, and reforms are very important. But it is my perspective that for queer liberation to happen is not just reforms that are necessary, but the creation and the of non-states and like grassroots and bottom-up organising among queer people. Do you have any suggestions for that, like tips, thoughts, whatever?
Awesome, and was there... Yep.
Hi, my name's Esther. I'm an Aboriginal LGBT elder. I'm also an historian for Western Australia, still having a living experience. Not lived. Lived means you're dead. So it's a living experience. I protested Sydney World Pride on the grounds of capitalism. Capitalism and racism walks hand in hand. We're talking about millions and millions of dollars went into Sydney World Pride. There were young people ringing from all over Australia who actually couldn't get in there. They couldn't participate. There is a purple circle within the queer community in Australia, right here in Perth also. So if you're not going to tackle these people around corruption and what corruption means, financial mismanagement, there's a lot of LGBT, organisations that are also finger dipping. They need to be forensically audited. So as an activist, it is your duty to take these people on. And if you're not prepared to do it, guess what? What Jasmine said is true. Nobody listens, nobody cares. Also internally, within the LGBT space in Australia, with the TERFs. And they are alive, they're well, They're kicking over there in the eastern states, and they deny you an opportunity to participate and to be part of the queer community. A lot of people are on the fringe. How's that inclusion? Seriously, how's that inclusion? So you have to get radical. Because guess what? Nobody's going to hand it to you. And you have to get out there. We did that at Sydney World Pride. There were 10 of us. Raylene Cooper and Save Our Songlines were there. And we were screaming at every single person who was inside. Because half of them were on the take. And they don't give a shit about the grassroots. End of story.
That was fantastic. And I think we'll just throw one over to, is it Pip? Yeah.
I'm Pip. Thanks for the presentations. I guess I wanted to ask about your thoughts on, well, firstly, do we actually even need a religious discrimination bill? It's doing so. It seems that we've already got laws that prevent what is this new law ostensibly sets out to do. And secondly, it seems to me that some of the laws, like I think Rachel was talking about, the Equality Bill in New South Wales, is making so many exemptions. I mean, it's at wedging the community and allies, of course. On the one hand, you need some elements in those bills, you need some of those reforms. On the other hand, they're including so many exemptions, which in our case probably is going to be a compromise. But, you know, I guess I wanted to hear your thoughts about, you know, I feel that with the Equality Bill in New South Wales, if we had a mobilised movement, grassroots movement, so pointing all this out, because all of this is being done in the rarefied halls of Parliament, nobody really is watching it. I mean, some people are watching closely, but they're not on the streets. Those things could be improved or eliminated. But at the moment, the religious institutions still hold so much sway, even over the Labor Party.
Alrighty, so some fantastic questions and comments. Would the panel like to discuss?
Great. All really good questions, and Esther, I'll give you my details, so if you want to come protest the queerocrats in Sydney, I'll be there with you. Queerocrats. Yeah, look, the pronouns is actually a really interesting development, and that really, Nori, who lives in Gadigal, in Waterloo Public Housing, was the second non-gendered specific person to get X on their passport, and it was really internationally important, and that was early stages of the marriage equality campaign, and that's, yeah, that MX that year became the most popular word used in one of the competitions of the word competition games that happen internationally. So that really started it, but I do think the pronoun stuff is important, and it's really great to see young people at the education conferences and so on, and within the queer collectives, but other collectives on campuses introduce each other and use pronouns. It's one way, particularly within, you know, the Palestine campaign or certain spaces where that's not practiced, it's basically coming out as queer. And yeah, I think that is an advance. It's not the be-all and end-all, and I think comrades make a really good argument. We've got to keep fighting for actual material wins and gains. I just wanted to point out, yeah, Qtopia is in Sydney now, Gadigal, Sydney, and it arose out of World Pride and is funded by Murdoch, and it is in the Darlinghurst Police Station. And this goes to the rainbow capitalism points that comrades have made on the floor as well, that we have Murdoch, who is absolutely transphobic and leading the campaign in America in particular, funding a queer museum in the place where the 78ers were bashed up that evening, of which the 78ers haven't won compensation yet, and they have had an apology in Parliament 2016, all very performative. Another apology came out from the New South Wales ALP government just a month ago to the gay men that they locked up with the laws that were criminalising homosexual acts, and again another performative, no compensation, etc., etc. But you just have this beast this absolute beast, which some of the rainbow NGOs are definitely part of, but the only counter to that is the street actions, is the mobilising. And I think, certainly in Gadigal, Sydney, it's the Palestine campaign that a whole bunch of us have moved our focus to. And I actually think that this is correct. And I think the point that the comrade made yesterday, Salim, saying, this is the litmus test for humanity. And actually can relate almost everything to the military-industrial complex push that the First Worlds are making, in particular, housing, queer rights linked there as well. There's just so much. That being said, we have had rallies to defend the Equality Bill in New South Wales, but they've been very small. So, and it is that, you look at Pip's one of the editors of Green Left, and she's like, Rach, there was a rally, there was an action. You've got to put it in Green Left. I'm like, oh, yes, and then, stuff happens. But there is a certain importance in recording these small but significant actions to show people that the struggle is there and point to where we need to go. I have another point, but I'll roll into it after some more contributions from the floor, about revolutionary socialist queer organising in history, and why we've got to also keep researching and talking about that, because it is substantial, it's very fascinating, but only the working class militants are going to bring that out.
Yep.
There we go.
Do you have anything to add, Jasmine?
Couple small things. To lady over here about your question about inclusion within our type of aligned work. A lot of it has just been symbolic, and that's it, just been surface level. A lot of work still needs to be done. Like, yeah, it's great on the forms. They ask for like stuff like preferred name, your gender, and stuff like that. But like I say, a lot of it's only just surface. There still needs work to be done on that to be more inclusive.
Yeah. I'll tackle a few of these too. If I could also start with the question of language. I think that as the liberal capitalist system wants to appear to be progressive, and they can't actually challenge the structures that have oppressed us, they rely heavily upon symbolic wins, the apologies in Parliament without any material effect that comes from that. Gender-neutral language. I think that language is something that seems like quite easy to control. Like we can have a form, and that can give you an other box on your under sex, right? It seems pretty easy, and there's still great reluctance in some parts of the capitalist system to implement even that. But I think what really matters at the end of the day is, do they walk the talk? So a friend of mine, he runs Trans 102s. So we've all seen Trans 101s, hey, just, don't be a dick, good presentation, see you later. But Trans 102 is about really internalizing that, yeah, trans women are women, and part of the natural diversity, and then you don't have these debates about, well, do they belong in sports though?
Yes.
Because we just are part of that diversity of what women means. Like, you have cis women and trans women, and all together we are women. Do we need a religious discrimination law? I think that there are minority religious perspectives, and they certainly would face a great deal of discrimination under contemporary capitalism. And I wouldn't want to speak against them advocating for that. I don't think that is who Labour or the Liberals are trying to court in forwarding this bill. I don't think this bill is in good faith, that. But if these minority religions did say, hey, here's some things that we could change around in our legislation that might help us out a little bit. But more broadly, to put the issue there, when we live under capitalism and we have at-will employment, discrimination law is pretty useless. Like, it is always better, you're always better off quitting your job and finding somewhere else when you face discrimination, rather than trying to fight the boss on it. Even with the union backing you, because they're just going to find another, you're being difficult, we're going to find an excuse, you know? And then if you do be difficult, then they're going to be like, oh, you're not going to have them as a reference on your CV anymore, are you? They're going to be like, oh yeah, I remember that employee, they kicked up a fuss about this and we don't like them very much. Okay, well I guess you're blacklisted from that industry now. Might have happened, might be based on personal experience. And creating grassroots movements. Thank you so much for coming, Finn. I love to see you here. Yeah, so in terms of expanding towards universal love, I think this is something that can't just be preached, but has to be practiced in our day-to-day lives. And I think it's pretty common within communist and anarchist communities to practice this, where our comrades in trouble and we will lend out a helping hand. We'll cook for each other. I'm sure if anyone at the conference today says, hey, I'm hungry, but you know, I don't have any money on me anymore, we're not going to say, okay, well, you can't eat, right? That's not what we do here. Just for a personal anecdote of how I've forwarded the sense of agape in my life. I was on a bus, and there was this I don't know if she was a single mother, but she was alone, and she had 2 kids that were running around being real ratbags. And usually I'd sit on that bus and be like, oh, those damn noisy children, I'm so annoyed at this, why can't that mother just keep them under control? But I was like, you know what, she's got a pram rolling around because she can't look after the pram when she's trying to wrangle the children. So I just went down to the front of the bus and put my hand on the pram, like, okay, that's not going to run into anyone or be a problem anymore. It's just being like, you're a member of my community, and I'm going to give you a hand because you clearly need it right now. And practicing that in our day-to-day lives, I think, is revolutionary. It may not be the whole of the revolution, but it's certainly a slice of it.
We probably just wrapped up at a good time. We're going to enter into a lunch break from now until 2 p.m. Lunch will be served here as yesterday and this morning. The next session will be at 2 p.m. We must start at 2 p.m. because we have a comrade from the USA who will be calling to us at 2 a.m. their time. So we've got to make sure that they can get some sleep. So I think our next session is against war and imperialism, people-to-people solidarity in the Asia-Pacific region. Thank you all so much for attending this panel, and well done to all of our speakers.